It's Thursday the 16th of July. Last night I understand the England versus Argentina game was satisfied in favour of the Argentinians. Now, in my previous roadcast I pointed out the calendrics surrounding pretty much each and every event that takes place in the public, and not just in the public actually, but in our individual private lives, and how they are all subject to a mathematical precision. In other words, things are repeating themselves on a timeline that is not actually linear, but is in fact circular, or at least going round in a spiral, as it were. So historically, events do repeat themselves. Now, this was published at my website and on Substack. And on Substack, within a few minutes of the video going up, I had a reply for Blue Sky Maiden. She's a feisty character, and I always enjoy her writings, especially when she's pointing out the misdemeanors of what she calls the new gurus, N-U-G-U-R-U, the new gurus, who she identifies as being like the Pied Pipers of the so-called alternative scene, as it were. And I've got, I've got no problem with that at all. Call them out, continue to do so. Anyway, what she took issue with was the fact that I was saying that I cited an example of how everything is mathematical using some guy who was relying on gematria, which is another way of simply adding up the numbers and coming to a conclusion. Now, I just wish to make it clear that contrary to what BSM, Blue Sky Maiden, was asserting, I'm not espousing that as an infallible system for working out where we are in terms of the calendric. Au contraire, what I'm suggesting is that the calendrics, the chronology, and when I mean the calendrics, I mean all the different calendars that have been used down throughout the ages. When that is applied to historical events, those calendrics all come together, and you can see quite clearly that there is a definitive and precise mathematical pattern to everything that's going on. For further information on this, for those who are interested, I would highly recommend once again the work of Jason Brashears. Anyway, just now I just wanted to clear that up. But what I did assert in my recent essays is that no team that is predominantly African is ever going to win the World Cup. And why? Well, as I suggested, it's on the basis of nous, the basis that everyone seemingly ignores because they don't want to appear racist, but the factual basis of IQ, intelligence quotient. The game of football was invented by the, for want of a better expression, the Caucasian. And to compete at the highest levels, you have to have a bit of nous about you. You look at the player who is in the Argentinian ranks, he's going on for 40. A fellow called Lionel Messi, who's of European-Italian extraction, if I can use that expression. And the one thing about him that you can take this to the bank, is that he's intelligent. Because are we not in a, well, whatever you're doing, whatever activity you're doing, and Brian Clough stated this most famously, it's all about what's going on in your brain, how well you play the game. Because it's all a mental construct. And if you're of a low IQ, you might be physically, athletically strong. You might be very fast, very quick. You might have great muscle elasticity. But when it boils down to it, in the final instance, it's all about what's in your noggin, about your natural levels of intelligence and how you can apply them to the game and the unfoldment of the proceedings that are going on around you. So, on that basis, I was not delighted, but not unsurprised to see England got knocked out. When I say England, I'm talking about an England team that is predominantly, over 50% of the team are of African or Jamaican descent. I've made that perfectly clear. Call me a racist, I really don't give a fuck at this point. I'm seriously beyond caring when it comes to that. I'm just stating the facts of the matter. And of course, it was the Spanish team, again predominantly Caucasian, that knocked out the predominantly African French team. So the non-event, that is the third place playoff final, is going to be between le nigre français and le nigre anglais. I don't need to translate that. I think you understand exactly what I'm saying. And I won't be watching it. It's a non-event. It's a non-spectacle as far as I'm concerned. But I'm using it just to vindicate my point about there being no World Cup winners will ever feature a team that is predominantly African. Now, you may wonder where I am today. I am out and about near Crouch, a place that I visited, I think it was about 3 months ago. And I've just dropped down from the peak where the Crouch War Memorial is, and I'm walking down this delightful valley. Back in February, I put out a video about a court hearing featuring my friend Steve, which was essentially a railroading. That matter is concerning his council tax. Now, subsequent to that, Steve put in an appeal against the ruling of, or the order of DJ Shorthose, a man who naturally became known as DJ Shortass, for reasons that I'm not going to repeat, but which you can, if you're interested, look at in the video that I've linked below. Now, one of the things that I've spoken about previously, and one of the things that people find very, very difficult to get their heads around, is the criminality that exists amongst what you may term to be the white-collar class, or sometimes people who are operating not just in the financial system, but also in the geopolitical realms of the civil service and of the local councils. And whilst the matter is still ongoing, I want to talk a little bit today about a Freedom of Information request that was lodged with a certain Philip Sudlow of Broxtowe Borough Council. Philip Sudlow is an assistant finance officer and public service officer who works for said council. And apparently he's on a salary of around £75,000. Now, when I read the response to this series of 9 questions, which was a Freedom of Information request, so I have no qualms about sharing it with you, I was surprised because at the time, initially, I did not know who it was that had responded. And for those of a certain vintage, if I tell you that it read to me like someone who was on a YTS scheme, a YTS, young person's training scheme at the council, you'll understand what I'm hinting at, because there was an incredible paucity of intelligence behind the response. He couldn't even spell certain words, like practice, for instance. And in other areas, he was simply dodging the question. But what we're looking at here, and this Freedom of Information request reveals it through the answers of Philip Sudlow, is a scandal that is looming large across the entire nation, and it's over council tax. You would not believe just how fraudulent it all is, and you would not believe the levels of criminality that are at play. And I'm sure Philip Sudlow is a lovely man as far as his neighbours are concerned, as far as his wife is concerned, and maybe even his children and his family. But the fact is, when it boils down to it, this man is taking from the public purse, and he's actually performing day after day, day in, day out, a disservice to to the people. He is a man who is signing fraudulent documents claiming that other individuals are in fact bankrupt and should have charges registered against their properties. But when you look into it, everything that he's engaged in is fraudulent. Well, maybe not everything, maybe 5% of what he does is actually above board. And you may wonder at this, you may be staggered at this. When I lay it out in the essay, you may well be staggered at the levels of fraud, manifest fraud, that are taking place. For a start, we're looking at a system whereby the councils and Philip Sudlow himself are acting in common practice. Common practice is a logical fallacy. The appeal to common practice is fallacious because it means this: just because this is how something is done does not mean to say that it's legal, lawful, or in any way correct. And every council across the country, and I'm talking specifically about England here, that takes individuals to court for non-payment of council tax is fundamentally acting fraudulently. And here, in broad brushstrokes are the reasons why. Firstly, there is no evidence that the individual is bankrupt. The council will go ahead and issue a summons. A summons is a formal request, or invitation if you like, for an individual to go and attend one of His Majesty's courts. These courts, in broad brush strokes, are come into two categories. You've got the civil courts, which is essentially the county court, the court of chancery, the appeal court, the high court, and you've got the criminal courts, which are the magistrates' courts and the crown courts. The magistrates' court can be used as a venue to listen to offences against the person, you know, misdemeanours that individuals are being accused of, right? So first of all, you've got this issue. Why is it that someone who may well have a very good reason for not paying their council tax is taken, seemingly, by the council into the magistrates' court, when it is in fact a civil matter? Anyway, it doesn't actually go into the magistrates' court because this is what is happening, and this is endemic across all councils in England and probably in Wales as well. The council will issue its own printed off document purporting to be a summons. It's not from the court. Now, when you look into it, Philip Sudlow will claim that the 1992 Council Tax Regulations Act permits the council, and him specifically, to print off these summons and send them out to individuals who are being accused of not paying their council tax. But of course, anyone with any nous will understand immediately that that is fraudulent. There is no power, there is no legislation that can permit any public body like a council to issue a summons. A summons has to come from a court where a complaint has been laid, a court which will then issue a number, a case number, that is attached to that particular individual summons. That summons will have to have a seal on it from the court, because otherwise how would you know it's genuine? Well, in this case, there is no court seal on the purported summons because the summons has been created, forged, we should say, by the council, and it's sent out to the individual along with a cover letter from the clerks of the justice. It's all one big scam, because what is going on, and this is in the Freedom of Information request also, this is demonstrably the case, is that the council are booking the magistrates' court. In his reply, Philip Sudlow effectively says that the court will provide the magistrates' court will provide the council with a booking form. So the council can go ahead and say, right, we're going to have a hearing on such and such a day. Now, in Steve's case, he actually turned up to this purported hearing. And it wasn't a hearing. They had simply hired a room at the magistrates' court. Philip Sudlow claims that they are paying 50p per individual summons or liability order. So they hire the court, right? And there may well be a magistrate sitting there, but there's certainly no clerks of the justices there. So it's completely illegal. In fact, it's a non-event, simply on the basis that a council cannot issue summonses, and this is not an official court hearing that is being held at one of His Majesty's courts. It's an absolute, what would you call it? It's a bit of a psyop, really. It's an elaborate pantomime to get the individual to cave in, because most people will cave in at that point. So Steve turns up, and of course the council worker who meets him outside the courtroom, there's no listing, by the way, there's no courtroom listing for this, which again tells you something, namely that it's not an official hearing. There's a council worker who intervenes before he goes into the courtroom when he's eventually found it. And essentially he goes in there, but it turns out that there are 217 liability applications before the magistrates' court on that day. Not before the magistrates' court, before this popinjay who's sitting on the bench acting out the role of a justice of the peace or a magistrate. Whatever he claims to be doing, it's all null and void because there's no justice, there's no clerk to the justices there. It's an elaborate pantomime. So effectively that individual, Steve witnessed it, is rubber stamping 217 liability orders, but they're not liability orders because what comes through is a notice of liability order. And when Steve contacted the magistrates court to ask them to provide him with all the orders that had been issued in his name, they told him, you have to refer to the council on this because we do not have any. Get that into your head. The magistrates court does not have any record of any such hearing having taken place. So Steve continues to press them. I mean, this has been going on for 3 years now. He continues to press them for a valid liability order. And what he gets is another printout from the council. This time, it's purportedly signed by a justice of the peace, but there's no name attached to it. There's no court seal. There's no letterhead of the magistrates court. It is in fact a forgery, on its face, forgery, that is masquerading as a liability order. And then on the basis of that fake liability order, Broxtowe Borough Council employ the services of a company called Wilkins Chapman, who are based in Grimsby and have offices all over the country. But they are also engaging in fraud, and they are appointed receivers in Steve's bankruptcy matter, because by now they're attempting to make him bankrupt. But the foundational document for the bankruptcy is essentially this liability order, which in any event is not an adjudged debt. There has been no determination at any point, let alone a judicial determination, that Steve owes any money and or is bankrupt. But that doesn't stop the fraudsters from continuing. These are white-collar criminals who are continuing, on the face of it, to be respectable individuals who are working as public servants. But the fact is, they are the opposite of that. They are disreputable and they are working against the public because they are carrying out on a daily basis acts of fraud against the members of the public, particularly those who have decided they don't want to be paying the extortionate council tax and they don't want to be pouring monies into a consolidated fund, which is where all council tax goes, which is being used to wage wars and conflicts around the world. Now, in terms of understanding exactly what I'm on about here, you may think, well, one of the things that is most difficult to get your head around is that we are brainwashed into believing that a criminal is not respectable, that a criminal is a disreputable fellow, typically of the working class, maybe like the Cray twins, something like that, but a villain, in other words, from the lower classes. But in order to understand it, I came across one way of understanding it is this, which I was reading in a Father Brown story, and I'm going to quote it now. It's from The Secret of Father Brown by G.K. Chesterton, and in the story called The Secret of Flambeau, we have this, and it's a description of what is the worldly man. You know, when I say the worldly man, I'm talking about the individual who may appear to be respectable, but this individual falsely believes that he's in a material world and he's on a rock adrift in space. And perhaps the thing that really worries him and keeps him awake, or the fear that lies at the heart of these individuals, is that it's meaningless. There is nothing at the heart of it all, that he's simply in a void, and the only solace he can take is through the materialism, the gross materialism of this world. I've said it about a number of politicians down the years, particularly Keir Starmer. He's a classic example of that, as is Nigel Farage, as are all of them, in fact. But this is an attempt to explain about what kind of individual can commit a particular crime. Then I thought of another sort of heathen, the sort that is not destroying the world, but entirely depending on the world. I thought that, save for the grace of God, I might have been a man for whom the world was a blaze of electric lights, with nothing but utter darkness beyond and around it. The worldly man, who really lives only for this world and believes in no other, whose worldly success and pleasure are all he can ever snatch out of nothingness. That is the man who will really do anything when he is in danger of losing the whole world and saving nothing. It is not the revolutionary man, but the respectable man who would commit any crime to save his respectability. Think what exposure would mean to a man like that fashionable barrister, an exposure of the one crime still really hated by his fashionable world. Treason against patriotism. If I had been in his position and had nothing better than his philosophy, heaven alone knows what I might have done. That is just where this little religious exercise is so wholesome. Those words are spoken, as it were, from the lips, the literary lips of Father Brown. But I think they go some way to explaining how and why individuals like Philip Sudlow, not just him, but those who are working as solicitors, barristers, judges, police, all those who are working in the so-called, within the confines of the legal system or justice system, that goes some way to explaining how they can actually commit their crimes that they're doing on a daily basis. Father Brown calls them heathens or worldly men. They're worldly, but they don't know their arses from their elbows. In other words, they mistake that all of this is real. They mistakenly believe that they are in a material world and every experience they have is of a materialistic nature, and therefore in a world that is devoid of meaning and purpose other than a materialistic one. It's only natural, you might think, that they are prepared to commit crimes in order to not just facilitate their actions, but to justify them in their own noggins. That's where we're at. And I hope in some way that helps to explain exactly what is going on with these individuals. When I exposed, and I will be doing, this entire rigged council tax game, for those of you that have not looked into it before, you'll be surprised. For those of you that have looked into it before, you'll think, yeah, exactly. We were saying this 16, 17 years ago. Yeah, and that's correct. 16, 17 years ago, people were correctly identifying the fact that the councils are hiring the courts and putting on these show pony events. I'm not going to call it a court hearing because it's not. It's a show pony event. It's founded in fallacy. And of course, these individuals will do anything to cover up their tracks. The fact that they are acting in what is deemed to be common practice. But an appeal to common practice is a logical fallacy, as can be clearly seen in this matter. In fact, these logical fallacies abound in most, if not all, legal matters, particularly those pertaining to the civil courts. I was reading a novella this morning by a writer called Philip K. Dick. It's called The Man Who Japed. A jape, of course, is a kind of trick usually played upon someone for comedic purposes. Anyway, it's set in the 22nd century, somewhere like in 2117. And the central character is living in a bit of a dystopian, post-nuclear catastrophe world in which the government is operating what it refers to as MOREC, and it stands for Moral Reclamation. It gets into trouble because basically his jape is to cut off the head of this gold-coloured but plastic statue and leave blood, put the head in the hand of the statue and splatter blood or red paint everywhere. That's his jape. And he's living in a world, and it sounds quite horrific, in which women are in control of each local commune, as it were. People are leasing accommodation from the government, and as a consequence of that, they are all subject to these checks. And there are individuals that will grasp upon each other, and so it has to be brought. The matter has to be brought before a committee, usually in the block, in the accommodation block. Anyway, so it's about his jape and the consequences of it. And for me, it brought up the subject of authority, and I've just been talking about authority in regard to council tax, because who has the authority to bring about a summons, to to send a summons out for someone to attend a court hearing is very plain and very clear. It has to be one of His Majesty's courts. And the only way you can prove that it's from a court is if it's got the court seal on it and it has been signed by the clerk to the justices or a judge, should I say, who is named. So this question of authority is an interesting one, because ultimately, and I have covered this before, ultimately, under whose authority are we each acting? Whose authority is Philip Sudlow acting under? Well, he claims, falsely, I hasten to add, that he has the authority, that the council financial officers, the revenue collections team, have the authority to send out summonses because the 1992 council tax regulations permits them to do that. And I challenge anyone to find a section in said act that states categorically that a council can send out its own summonses. I mean, it's fucking laughable. But in this kind of dystopian image of the future, the Philip K. Dick story, you see exactly what this could lead to, and how these so-called, on the face of it, respectable individuals are in fact acting as white-collar criminals who are pretending that they have the authority over their fellow citizens or fellow beings, as a matter of fact. The only authority, truly, that anyone is under is that of God. You can't serve two masters, and if you accept that you're a citizen, or that you accept the authority of some white-collar criminal working for the council, then effectively you're acting in a sacrilegious way, because you've put a man-made construction between you and your divine creator, the true God, the creator of all that is. So when it boils down to it, it's a question of knowing who and what you are, namely a divine soul residing in a avatar that is passing through this construct. You are a sojourner, and when you know that, no one can come between you and your maker. That's exactly how it is and how it should be. That's how you're supposed to live your life. And I suppose to add extra credence to that, I just wish to make the point that an individual who is LARPing, if you like, or acting out the role of a politician or a council worker, shall we say a revenues collection officer, an individual who's acting out the role of a judge or of a barrister or a constable, and is seeking to exercise dominance or authority over other people, does not truly know who he is. He doesn't know who he is, he doesn't know what he is, and ultimately he doesn't know where he is. Because if he truly understood, then he would not be acting in such a way as to impose on the rights of an individual. He would not be breaking the golden rule, namely, do unto others as you would have them done unto you. Or to put it in the form of a negative averment, don't do to others what you would not want done unto you. And it's as simple as that. But individuals who are in love with the material world because they're afraid that ultimately they are in a void of meaninglessness, they're in a world that is devoid of God, are unloved, or they feel themselves to be unloved, and they feel themselves to be living lives which are without purpose. So you could say naturally they seek solace in the materialism, in the gross materiality of the world. And that is always doomed to failure. Eventually they'll come to the realization they are but spirits passing through an immaterial world. On a hot day like this, I absolutely love being in the woodlands, and we're going to drop down now to the Cromford Canal, and then I'm going to walk southwards before turning back and climbing up to Crouch again when I've parked the car. On the subject once again of this third place final, les nègres français versus les nègres anglais, I would just like to say this. If anyone wants to call me racist, that's fine, but here's something to contemplate. As I've said before, just because you are born on the landmass of a certain country, or because you've been imported into that country and you've lived there for a time, you can never be indigenous to that country. You are not a native. It's a bit like this. Think of it this way. If a mouse is born in a stable, does that make it a horse? And on that note, I'm going to conclude it there for today. I am now on the, what would you call it? I'm on the eastern bank of the River Derwent. I've completed my walk along the Cromford Canal, which was a 2.5 mile stretch, if that, but a little bit noisy because you're next to the railway line, and then beyond that you've got the busy A6, which is the main thoroughfare up the Derwent Valley and beyond to Buxton. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this and you've got this far, first of all, I'd like to congratulate you on your attentiveness and just say how much I appreciate it. And secondly, if you are able and feeling generous, please consider chucking a few quid into the Buy Me a Beer fund via the Buy Me a Coffee button, which is linked below. I can be found on Substack, on Twitter, on Facebook, but most of all, I am to be found at roguemail.org. If you go to roguemail.org, please sign up for the newsletter. I currently am sending out a newsletter every Sunday morning. As I've said before, it makes a lovely accompaniment to your morning ablutions on the Sabbath. So until the next time, all I've got to say is thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you later.